Ian McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It gives me pleasure to take a call on the Organised Crime and Anti-Corruption Legislation Bill. The government produced this bill as a result of a report on strengthening New Zealand's, resistance to organised crime. And it was an all-government department report, and it encompassed the whole of our legal fraternity. And you can tell by the number of bills that it touches on, a dozen of them, I think, that it was quite a complicated bit of legislation for someone like me to understand. I could understand the need to deal with some of the facts we're dealing with, but it was pretty hard to understand how it all worked. And so linking it together was quite a task. It took a while. But primarily the bill gives the law enforcement agencies to deal with instances of organised crime and corruption, not only in New Zealand, but internationally. As I said, I found it interesting, but quite complicated, and I'll endeavour to explain during the contribution I'm going to make to this bill. We heard from some 20 submitters, almost all of them in support of one form or another. Many of them related to the bank's role in this bill, and the bank's role in this bill, whilst it seems minor, is actually quite important, in that the banks give the law enforcement agencies the ability to track financial transactions. And there was a lot of discussion about how those financial transactions would be managed, who would manage them, and at what point they would be reported to the law enforcement agencies. The law enforcement agencies needed a fairly urgent, or needed this information as quickly as they could get, and the banks needed time to be able to compile it and put it together. And so there was some changes made to the bill with respect to the amount of time the banks had. I think the bill talked about 10 days, and the bill now talks about 10 working days, which satisfied the bank's request in that respect. A number of the submissions raised an issue that I found to be very interesting. And of course, it's been talked about almost by almost every speaker tonight, not all with the same view. And I really quite enjoyed the contribution the last speaker made to this, because he touched on the fact that around the world, things are quite challenging. And in fact, Jonathan Young touched on that fact a little earlier too, that trade is what makes the world go round, and in every part of the world, trade's dealt with in a different manner. And so the issue of facilitation payments, or bribes as David Clendon called them, and they could well be called bribes as well, is quite a complex one. And I think that we've probably arrived in the right situation in this, and I will explain why in a moment. But there is a very fine line between a bribe and a legitimate payment being made to someone for, services rendered, or as the bill words it, a routine government action. I remember when I was much younger, I spent a lot of time in a fairly large continent, and I remember one night pulling up in quite a large passenger plane in the middle of a runway. A fellow ran up the stairs of the plane when they dropped the stairs, paid the pilot off, and everyone walked off the plane and out through the back door. We didn't have to go through customs. Nothing to do with me, I might add, but that's the sort of thing, I guess, that this bill is attempting to manage. Obviously, in some parts of the world, there's a lot of that sort of stuff happens. Whilst these payments, facilitation payments, are legal in New Zealand and Australia, and I think it was pointed out earlier that the law is worded slightly differently, certainly in Australia, than it is in New Zealand, and consequently could have a different interpretation made of it. They are illegal in the UK, although surprisingly, the Director of the Serious Fraud Office and the Director of Public Prosecutions have issued a joint statement in the UK saying they're very unlikely to prosecute in the case of small facilitation payments being made. And I do find it a really interesting topic, this, because I think that when you look all around the world, the trade varies so much, and there's so many different ways of dealing with this issue, that it would be quite, I would be very reluctant for us to support, I guess, the SOP that David Clendon's putting up. For that reason, I think it would preclude us from some courses of action, in particularly our trade relationships, that we may well want to make. The types of crime talked about in this bill, frankly, make one's hair stand on end. And one of them, human trafficking. I think the penalties for human trafficking in this bill are 20 years in jail or $500,000 fine. And I was kind of likening the human trafficking, and I realise it's a little different, to an interest that or topic I'm very interested in, that of stock rustling. And I wonder whether there's a great deal of difference between stealing someone's person and someone's sheep. And I guess I would definitely struggle to get penalties of that order for stock rustling, but in fact it's a similar sort of a thing when you think about it.
What?
Yes, well, hopefully. I don't know whether they do, but I'm not sure more sheep do get stolen than people actually. But bribery, of course, is a very large topic in the course of this bill. And the other topic that came to the fore, and its many forms, was money laundering. And I go back to the days of the bookie in the local pub. And they're outlawed now, of course. They were then too, but they still operated. But I do go back to those days, and I'm pretty sure a lot of money that went through those bookmakers' hands was far from legitimate. And so we've been humans have been, I guess, in the money laundering business almost forever. And of course, the money laundering business also, I guess, impacts largely on a worldwide scale on the gambling business. And for many of us, gambling is I was going to say a way of life, I shouldn't say that. Gambling is kind of, I guess, a hobby that's undertaken by people, but at the same time, gambling is also undertaken by a large sector of the criminal fraternity with a view to laundering the ill-gotten gains of some form of crime or other. The other issue that, of course, is very important or looms very large in the course of this bill is the matter of drug smuggling and the worldwide drug markets, and how that money changes hands and how it is used once it's changed hands. And so this bill will go a long way to making sure that New Zealand sits with the rest of the world in enabling to handle these things in a very strong and sensible manner. It really strengthens the law enforcement agencies' ability to track a whole lot of stuff that we currently have the law in place to deal with, but not in the form that it's now been put in place or will be put in place once this bill goes through Parliament and once the amendments are made to those 12 different acts that need to be amended to get us to the point we need to be at. The bill ensures we're able to cooperate with agencies worldwide. It encourages better cooperation and understanding with our friends around the world. It will enable us as a country, as has been referred to a number of times tonight, to stand with the United Nations and manage our way through a lot of these issues as we need to. So, Mr. Speaker, the bill was put through under the leadership of the Law and Order Select Committee under the leadership of Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi, and I think he did a pretty good job of getting this bill through there. And as I said, I thought it was a little complicated, also under the stewardship of Minister Amy Adams. In the course of the discussion on this bill by the Select Committee, there were some 9 changes, or 10 changes, I think, in all made to the original bill that was put to the committee. And those changes, I think, will ensure that this bill moves smoothly through the next phase of the House, and obviously there's an SOP coming from the Greens. And I'm also very pleased, Mr. Speaker, to note that the whole House supports this bill pretty much in its entirety. I think that's a pretty good feat as well. So, Mr. Speaker, I have no problem supporting this bill going to the next step, and I'll thank you for the opportunity to speak on it.